Hello everyone, I'm George from Ireland, and here we're outside Learie Constantine's house in London. Learie Constantine was born in Trinidad in 1901. His great-grandparents had been held in slavery, but by the time he came around, his family were lower middle class, so they didn't have a great deal of money. He said he had a wonderful upbringing, plenty of time to play, and the best things in life are free, in the hills, by the sea, and so on. So he was only a middling ability pupil at school, according to himself, and his first love was cricket, so he indulged that passion in much of his free time. Trinidad was obviously a British colony at the time. There was a large black community, a large Indian community, a small white community who pursued exclusionary policies and more or less monopolized political power for themselves and really a lot of the wealth, the lion's share. And so I don't think there was actually formal legal discrimination. But anyway, he left school, became a clerk in a solicitor's firm. If you were a clever boy, or very rarely girl in those days, it was possible to start to do office jobs or secretarial jobs and work your way up and eventually be entered in for your articles as an exam to qualify as a solicitor. And that's what he did. Anyway, he married. He had one daughter, Gloria. I'm not sure if she's still alive, not anymore. And he came to the United Kingdom. He was brought up to think this is the mother country, even though obviously his ancestors didn't come from here. And would have been a bit of a shock to him to see that whites weren't always in positions of authority. They were doing menial jobs, and he was much more educated than many of them, and so on. And some of them were like just staggeringly ignorant about black people from the Caribbean, thought that the West Indies was in India and things like that. But he was a professional cricketer from 1928 onwards. He'd made his debut playing for the West Indies as in an international in 1928. So it was relatively late to represent his country for the first time. I know Trinidad and Tobago is a country, but for cricket purposes, the West Indies is a nation, as in all the former British colonies in the Caribbean. We tend not to say West Indies these days, except in a cricketing context. By the way, I'm the worst cricketer in the world, and I absolutely abominate that sport, so I shan't say too much about his playing, because I don't know a great deal about his cricket career. What interests me are the other aspects of his life. Anyway, he played for a club called Nelson in Lancashire. Presumably it's named after Lord Nelson. I don't think there's any place called Nelson, as in the Admiral, not Mandela. He experienced racism quite a lot here. Some people were just a bit paternalistic, and some people were really vicious and rudely insulting, and the N-word was used with gay abandon at the time. But so he bore himself with great dignity through these many humiliations. Anyway, the Second World War came along, and there was a labour shortage here. So the United Kingdom was very keen to recruit people from the Antilles to come here and work in various positions, especially as a lot of men were off fighting to work in factories and so forth. And indeed, there were men from the Caribbean fighting in the British Army, or the Royal West Indies Regiment. Was that considered part of the British Army as a separate army? I don't know. On the Allied side, and in the Royal Air Force. But they didn't get a lot of gratitude, particularly after the war. Anyway, so the British government used him as a liaison officer in the Department of Labour to try and deal with some of the issues faced by black people from the Caribbean, who often found it difficult to get accommodation and faced discrimination. He later published a book about this called The Colour Bar, as in more people being barred from places on the grounds of their ethnicity. And notoriously, in 1943, he booked a hotel room, and he turned up and the hotel refused to admit him on the grounds of his race. So he took them to court over that, and he won his case, which was really a landmark case, because up until that time, it wasn't clear if people could discriminate on a racist basis, because I suppose there's no statute saying that was forbidden. In the 1960s, the first Race Relations Act came in, another one in the 70s, which made all this explicit and enhanced the rights of ethnic minority people who experienced a lot of informal segregation. Not saying there was any apartheid law in this country, but some ethnic minority people would have the door slammed in their face when they were seeking accommodation or a job. He was called to the bar, I think, in the 1950s. He was living here in 1949 to 54, which is about the time he qualified as a barrister, practiced mainly here rather than in his homeland. So he was knighted in the early 60s, and he was then made High Commissioner for the West Indies, because several countries in the Caribbean had banded together and set up a high commission here. It was very expensive. I mean, the larger ones like Jamaica could afford that on their own, but some of the very small ones like St. Lucia or Dominica might not be able to afford that. I mean, now they all have separate high commissions. So within the Commonwealth, it's called a high commission, not an embassy, and the person in charge is the high commissioner, not the ambassador. But there was this dispute by bus drivers and bus conductors, i.e. ticket inspectors in Bristol, and he loudly spoke up for people of his nationality who'd be discriminated against. Some people felt he'd overstepped the bounds of diplomacy. Anyway, so it was decided that he should be reassigned. The West Indies decided they would just withdraw his accreditation and replace him with someone else. So that was the end of his diplomatic career in 1964 after only 3 years. But he nevertheless spent most of the rest of his life here. But he was castigated by some for being like too British, being absorbed by the establishment, just seduced by the baubles they'd held out to him, that he wasn't radical enough because black consciousness was on the rise. There was the anti-apartheid movement, decolonization was going, Marxism became quite popular in the Caribbean and in Africa, and some people felt he was behind the times. He was just not giving the United Kingdom a hard enough time of it. His vociferation had deserted him. You know, he died in 1971 in London, not here in Hampstead, which is a few miles that away to the north. Although I have a feeling he's buried in his native country. So there's songs about him. A well-respected figure. I believe it's pronounced Constantine, not Constantine. Well, that is enough about Learie Constantine. Sorry, Sir Learie, I should say. Toodaloo.